All right, everybody, what's going on? It is Wednesday, November 4th, and this is the Fight Business Podcast. I'm your host, Patrick Auger, and today I've got a very special guest with me. I've got the founder and CEO of the Elite Amateur Fight League, Jesse Nunez. Jesse, how you doing?
Doing good, brother. How you doing, Patrick?
I'm doing great. It's great to hear from you. I've researched the Elite Amateur Fight League. I know a little bit about it, but just to give our viewers who haven't heard about it, can you just give a brief overview of what the league is and what you're trying to do from a big scale?
Absolutely, man. So, when you look at the sport of MMA, the UFC is doing a fantastic job at the top. I mean, Dana White's basically created a whole new sport, but it's a really young sport and hasn't fully developed into a mainstream sport. And we did some research about 6 years ago, did a full year of R&D, and found that the missing key ingredient into making MMA a mainstream sport was the national amateur platform type competition, right? If you look at the NBA or the NFL, the NCAA was around 20 years before the NBA was. It was around 20 years before the NFL was. So they do a great job really promoting and building brands behind athletes and giving them a place to showcase their skill, to grow as athletes, build a fan base before they ever get to the pros. And that's why people follow that point guard, from Duke to the NBA, and they follow the quarterback from USC to the NFL. And right now, MMA doesn't have that structure. And so we concepted a team versus team, state versus state, national amateur MMA tournament, basically following the same premise as the NCAA basketball tournament, but then applying that to the sport of MMA. And that's what we do at the Elite Amateur Fight League.
Yeah, that's awesome. I love that idea. I agree that, for a while now, Michael Fidel, the deputy editor here, he's gone off and started a site, MMAprospects.com. Shout out to that. But, we've always talked here at the Body Lock about how when you're looking at prospects, and especially on the amateur side, there's not a lot of, set leagues going on. You occasionally see some undercard bouts on promotions like LFA or Bellator, but there's not really a league like you're talking about. I love this idea. I think it's great. With that being said, just to dive into it a little bit more, in terms of the teams you're talking about, state versus state, are the teams gyms exclusive? Do you have guys from multiple gyms being on the same team since it is state versus state?
Yeah, so it really depends, man. In a state like Florida, where they've got one of the biggest and best gyms in the world, American Top Team, they were able to furnish us a whole team, right? They were able to give us 7 guys at 7 weight classes and supply a team. Jackson Wink did the same thing out of New Mexico. But some of the other states like Illinois, their 7 fighters came from 5 different gyms. Teams like Indiana, that 7 different fighters from 7 different gyms. So really what we're looking to do is find the highest ranked fighter that is willing to take a tough fight. That's the key, because you've got a lot of high ranked fighters that aren't willing to take tough fights, and comprise the best guys in each weight class to make up a team to represent their state in a national tournament.
Yeah, that makes sense. And as a guy from Illinois myself, I know you're from the Chicago area. That's not surprising, right? That you've got a lot of gyms mixing together there.
Yeah.
But yeah, it makes perfect sense what you're saying in terms of needing to take those tough fights, because especially when you're in the amateur level, something else that I've noticed particularly is when you're trying to get to that next level to professional, you kind of, not necessarily take easier fights all the time, but you want to kind of build those skills and take the easier fights while you're an amateur so it won't show up on the pro record.
Right. And I'll be honest, man, most coaches are doing it the right way, right? They're looking out for their fighters. They understand they need to get them experience. Obviously, no one wants a losing record, so they know they need to get them some wins. But at the same time, if you've got 5 amateur fights that all have lasted 30 seconds, you've gotten no real experience as an amateur. Right. And if you're fighting only guys with losing records, are you really challenging yourself? Are you really ready for the pros? In that case. So, there's got to be a fine balance. Most coaches find it. Most coaches find that good balance of fights that maybe they think their guys should win, and then challenging fights for their guys to get better. What we offer is completely unique to your regional fight scene. Most regional fight scenes are gym shows, right? You have a gym that's connected with the promoter. and they get their guys wins. If you can line up that whole gym on one side of the card and then find them wins on the other side of the card, that's really what amateur MMA looks like in a lot of regions across the country. And you end up getting a 5-0, a 6-0, a 7-0 guy who's really doesn't have a whole lot of cage experience because his fights are so quick, and he's done it against people that don't belong in the cage with him, right? And if you were to take that model and use it in any other sport, you'd have horrible athletes going pro, right?
Yeah.
And unfortunately, we see some guys that go pro too quick, and some guys that stick around in the regional fight scene for way too long. And the reason that is there's no structure. There has to be an ability to go, okay, this guy's 5-0, 6-0. We think he has the talent to go pro. Let's put him in this league with other 5-0, 6-0 guys, get him tough fights, build a fan base on television, prove that he's ready for this professional side of the sport before we move him on. And really that's what we've done. We take those 5-0 guys and 6-0 guys and match them against each other. And we get some pushback from some of the coaches saying, hey, I don't want to get my guy a loss. This is too tough of a fight. The fact is, man, when you go pro, no one remembers your amateur record. You don't want to take that first tough fight as a pro and get that first loss when you're in the professional ranks. You want to do that in your amateur career and push yourself and test yourself, because the day you go pro, you're 0-0. And no one on the professional level pays, whether you're a 7-0 amateur or a 4-4 amateur, you're getting paid the same as an 0-0 pro. It doesn't matter, right? So why not challenge yourself? Build the fan base on television that we offer, and know that you're ready for that next step, whether good or bad, right? If you find out you're ready for it and you can move on, excellent. If you find out, man, I am just a regional fighter, at least you know where you stand, and no one's lying to you and giving you a false record or false hope of getting to that next level. And that's what the NCAA does really well for football and basketball and all the other mainstream sports. And that's what we plan on doing for MMA.
Now, to move a little bit more to the business side of things,
yeah,
we haven't seen a league like this that I can recall since similar to the professional league of the International Fight League, right? When you had way back in the day in 2006, 2007, bringing this type of format back. Are there challenges or obstacles you face from a business perspective that are harder because of the format than, say, someone like LFA or Titan FC, or even some of those very small regional, promotions in certain areas of the country? Are you finding difficulty because of the format at all?
Absolutely. There's a reason why nobody's done this before. It's hard to do. The logistics of running a 12 team or 16 team league and getting full teams back and forth and paying for their airfare and paying for all the logistics and putting them in hotel rooms and treating them like an NCAA athlete, it's costly, right? When you have a small regional show at home, everybody's local. You drive a couple guys in if you need matchups, and that's much easier to do from a business perspective. Even regional pro shows, right? If you're grabbing all the local talent, there's no hotel costs, there's limited hotel costs, there's limited travel cost. The coaches and the fighters are all local. And, you don't have a whole lot of logistics to maintain and pay for in a regional scene. So it's absolutely hard to run a team versus team structure across the country with teams from coast to coast. So that's one of the challenges. The other challenge that we're finding is people have been doing it, this way for 25 years, where they fight on the regional scene, they rack up a bunch of wins, they hope they get noticed, they get moved on to a regional professional opportunity and hope they get noticed there to move on to the UFC. When people have been doing things for 20, 25 years, it's hard to convince them to do it a different way, right? So we stopped trying to convince people. We just put our platform out there. We put it on television. We show the exposure. We promote even when the fights aren't going on. We follow our athletes up to the professional ranks and make sure everybody knows where they're fighting, who they're fighting, and we continue to promote for those athletes. And it's been taken notice of. And UFC fighters that are coaches in our league are spreading the word. We've got big gyms like American Top Team and Jackson Wink and Team Quest and Fight Ready out of Arizona, who's our current national champions, really getting behind the platform. And, we're not begging for anybody to come take a tough fight anymore. If you want to take a fight, that's going to put you on television, challenge your fighter, and prove that he's ready for the pros, we're here for you. If that's not what you want to do, I'm not here to convince you it is.
Yeah, value chain disruption is what entrepreneurship is all about. And it sounds like you're doing that. And it's just, yes, it's never easy, right? Especially to be the first guy. We'll get into the, some of the fighters on the pros that you've been affiliated with here in a second, but just to talk a little bit about, the cost that you mentioned, right? Because it is much more expensive to bring everybody over to do all of that. But on the Face of Chicago Business podcast, you stated that you only the first year even, and the second year, it sounded like you had pretty low losses, right? Which is common. Anytime you start a business, you're few.
It's common to have a loss. It's not common to have a small loss.
Yes, that's exactly. That's what I was getting to. It's common to be, in the red after the first year of starting a business. To be that small, though, especially with the cost you're talking about, is that caught me by surprise. That caught my attention. How did you manage to do that? Was there, just really efficient processes in place and cost-cutting structure? Was there enough revenue growth and interest from this format that you were able to kind of say, hey, we took a little bit of a hit here in our first couple of years, but now we're accelerating?
Right. So, I mean, it was a really putting a plan in motion, man. We knew coming in we were going to lose for the first couple of years, especially with the amount of logistics that it takes to run a league. We partnered with promotions that were having events, and we would bring them really good matchups in Arizona and in California. And, while we didn't have any revenue coming in from ticket sales, because the promoters that we were working with were collecting that, what we did a really good job on was distribution. We knew we had opportunities on NBC Sports Chicago, and we reached out to local advertisers who want to reach that male 18 through 34 demographic on a sports channel. And we made our money on sponsorship sales in the cage and on television broadcasts. If we were depending on the ticket money, we probably, we wouldn't have made it. And that's really the angle we took from the get. We want to be a media product with the best amateur fighters from across the country and a national state versus state tournament. We knew that we're filling a hole in an industry, and sports television needed, more content, and more than ever they need it today because of what's going on with coronavirus. But as long as we built a good league with good content, with legit fighters that were exciting to watch, we knew we would turn the corner. And so we just put our head down and charged at it. And eventually in season 3, we had 975% revenue growth. And, unfortunately, COVID came around for season 4, but we're still really confident with what we have, the product we've built. And there are some silver linings, with the opportunity to get on a bigger broadcast network, to talk to the people who need sports content and a sport that's proven they can do it during COVID. And that's where we sit today.
Now, not relying on ticket sales, especially for original promotion, is very unique. I would say that's the first I've heard of for a regional promotion to really go the broadcast distribution route. And it seems to have paid off here. You mentioned that 975% revenue growth.
Yep.
In the video that you have on your website about that growth, it looks like now, and maybe I'm mistaken here, that during that growth, ticket sales are now a factor. Is that correct?
Yeah. So initially we had affiliate promoters that would be hosting a fight in Arizona, and we would bring Team Arizona and Team New Mexico together at their event, and they would get the ticket sales, right, or California or whatever. In season 3, after working with our affiliate promoters, we decided, hey, let's have our own events here in the Chicago area, and we had one in Virginia as well. Worked with a couple affiliate promoters in the West Coast to do those West Coast fights, and did a really good job at getting venues, selling tickets. So the ticket revenue plus sponsorship plus broadcast, sponsorships really is what turned the corner for that revenue growth. But we knew in season 1 and 2, we weren't selling tickets, right? Nobody knew who we were. We had to build an audience. We had to build teams. We had to build the trust inside the industry so that we would have the right talent. And so it was a needless risk to take on at that point, when we knew we could partner with promoters who already had shows that needed fights. and that needed broadcast partners. So what we would do is we would approach an affiliate promoter and say, hey, I own a broadcast company or a production company. We'll come film all 14 of the fights. We'll give you your 7. We'll keep our 7, and everybody wins, right? They don't have to pay for production. I don't have to pay for an event, and we get to build our products on our own angle. And that's really the angle we took early on to minimize the risk. But once we learned what we were doing, it was time to do it for ourselves.
And you talk about risk, and you touched on it a little bit a second ago in terms of COVID, right? That's throwing everything in the world of live sports just all over the place. For this particular business model too, I would imagine, right? Because we've heard about COVID outbreaks at particular gyms. Sanford MMA, right, had several fighters. Once one fighter gets it, depending on who they're training with, you end up spreading out through the gym rather than particular areas or states necessarily.
Right.
So for you guys, how have you handled COVID given the business format that you're going for? And do you believe that once things, now that ticket sales are a factor, do you believe that once things kind of settle down, hopefully in the next, fingers crossed, 6 months to a year, that ticket sales will return in full force? Has there been any indication of that on your end from fans or things of that nature?
So the effect of COVID initially was very negative, right? We had our season slated to start in March of 2020. Obviously, we all know what happened with COVID. Everything got canceled starting in March. It really pushed us back a full year at this point. I don't think we'll have another event until probably March of 2021. So the immediate effect was negative with canceling the season. Since then, it's given us some time to really plan out some things that we wouldn't have had time to plan going directly into the next season. It's given us time to build the league out where we were at 8 teams. We'll be at possibly 16 teams. We know we'll be at 12, but there's a possibility that we start next season with 16 teams rather than 8. And then there's other things like mobile, betting sites and gambling sites that all of a sudden are just a main part of the industry, and being able to apply for licenses and being a bettable entity, I think will give us an opportunity to make up some of that revenue that we know we're not going to make through ticket sales. We don't plan on having anybody at our events for the full year. That's our plan. We're hoping our national championship will be live with live attendance and fans, but I don't see us having people in the stands or in a building inside for probably the full year until the national championship.
So, IFL was one of my favorite styles of a league, right? I miss it dearly. I got to ask, why did you decide to do amateur and why teams? Why? Yeah. What led you to that route?
Well, I think a lot of people liked IFL. It was unique inside the sport of MMA. It was a team-based concept, but the truth is, I don't think there's a whole lot of professional fighters that want to be part of a team. They want to be the best pound for pound fighter in all of MMA, and they don't want to have to rely on, whether my team wins to move forward, which is why when we decided to go team versus team, we went the amateur route. And the real reason that we decided to go team versus team is more of a business reason. There's 35 million MMA fans in the Americas, and there's 191 million casual sports fans in all of the Americas. And what is a casual sports fan? A casual sports fan is someone who buys the jersey, wears the hat, watches it on television, buys a ticket to the event, that really isn't a hardcore baseball or hockey fan, right? They like the Blackhawks because they're from Chicago. So a casual sports fan is tied to their sport via peer relations because they want to enjoy it with their friends, and geographical location because it's the home team. So we wanted to bring more casual sports fans into the fold, and that's why we decided in the team versus team product, if we can get you to be a fan of maybe one fighter because he's from Chicago, and all of a sudden you become a fan of Team Illinois, and that guy moves on to the next level, you'll still be his fan over at the UFC or wherever he goes, but you'll also still remain a Chicago fan, right? You want the jersey, you want to cheer for the home team, you want to talk about something with your friends that enjoy MMA, or maybe that just enjoy sports. And that's really the reason we went for team versus team, state versus state. And then we did it on the amateur side because we understood that the pros really don't want to be on a team. But the amateurs, to get the exposure that we're giving them, don't care that they're on the team. They want to get to the next level. And this is the best opportunity for them to get to that level.
Got it. And you mentioned betting, which that's all the rage right now, right? Virginia just passed several things to allow betting in. States are following suit with the investments in your league, right?
Yeah.
And I want to pivot to this a little bit. Is you guys have a very unique take on this, where you are allowing fans to invest in the league. And if I understand correctly, you've partnered with WeFunder to allow fans to essentially buy shares. How has that been going? Have you seen a lot of fan interest? Is it strange to have fans essentially, own part of the company?
Well, I mean, part of the whole concept of this thing is we want to, disrupt the industry, and it's the only way to really. Sorry about that.
Oh, no worries.
So part of this whole thing is we really want to disrupt the industry, and part of the industry is who owns sports teams. I mean, if you look across the spectrum of all of professional sports, you've got millionaires being turned away by the NBA because they're not good enough for the NBA, right? You don't have the normal guy, the normal Joe, that can own a piece of sports team. And with the invention of equity crowdfunding, we thought, man, wouldn't it be great if our fans can become owners of the league? And you don't have to be an accredited investor, which means you don't have to have millions of dollars in the bank. You can invest as little as $300, become an owner in the league, and actually own shares of equity in what we're building with the Elite Amateur Fight League. Our business model is way different than most. We're building a sports league, and our plan is to franchise off our teams and pay dividends to our investors, meaning we don't plan on selling the league. We plan on franchising off teams and making money for our investors when those teams get sold. So if we can build 32 teams across the board that have value, even if there's valued as little as $1 million each, that's $32 million at a current $5 million valuation of the whole league. We plan on going that route with what we're doing on our business model. It's not going to be overnight. It's not going to be tomorrow. It's not going to be in 2 years. It'll probably take us 5 years to get to a point to where we may be franchising off teams. But it's the opportunity that we're giving to the normal sports fan, the normal MMA fan, guys that, never have an opportunity to get in on the ground floor with something like this. We're real proud that we decided to do it this way. And we're excited about the offering.
And, with that offering, are we talking also about like voting shares here where, they're getting prospectuses, all of that?
Well, it won't be voting shares. It's okay. Common shares. So common shares, meaning you own a percentage of whatever percentage you put in of the pre-money valuation that was at $5 million when we started the raise. Obviously, we're going to be worth more than that in season 4 and in season 5. And really the value comes or the payoff comes not in a sale of the league, but rather the franchising off of teams. And when that happens, we're able to pay dividends to our investors. Me as an owner, I don't get paid unless my investors get paid, right? As an owner of the league, if I want to pay a dividend out as a 90% share owner, I can't pay just myself. I have to pay everybody that has ownership inside of the company. Obviously we'll have salaried employees and people who run parts of the business that will be getting paid a salary, but they won't own percentages of the league. And then it's just a great opportunity for anybody who wants to get involved in the sports industry. $300. I mean, most people can invest $300, and that's the opportunity we're offering.
Yeah, it's certainly a unique opportunity. Everything you're saying in terms of, letting the fans have some shares and getting them more invested in it makes sense to build that fan base as well, right?
Absolutely.
If I could go own, a piece of the Chicago Cubs, and sorry, I don't know if you're a White Sox or Cubs guy, but
White Sox fan, man. So I take offense to that stuff. No, I'm joking.
Well, still, White Sox as well. If I could go own for some shares of that for $300, minimum, that's a huge investment. Now, when we're talking about, circling back to some of the professional fighters that you've been affiliated with, I know you again spoke on that podcast about Sam Alvey being an integral part of helping the league get off the ground, and Frankie Sands is also your fighter relations guy. Is that correct?
Yeah. So Frankie Sands is our fighter relations guy. He's been with the league as our play, not our play-by-play, but our fight analyst since season one. So he's been with us since season one. He's taking an active role in fighter relations this year as part of the executive team. Sam is the coach of Southern California, the Southern California Kraken, and has been a huge part of our league over on the West Coast, and finding us fighters. They were the original national champions in season one. You got guys that fought on that team like the Kim brothers, who are right there on the cusp. Both John and Josh Kim. Spike Carlisle, who's a UFC fighter, was on his team originally in season one. They fought Team Arizona, who what's his name? He's a Marine veteran. Kyle Stewart was on Team Arizona in the first concept season. Also UFC fighter. So we got guys that have started, in those first couple seasons that are making that turn onto the big stage and in the big platform. And then in season two, there's just a slew of guys that are on the cusp. I think Kaleo Romero is one of those guys. The guys out over in Jackson Wink, there's a few of those guys that are right there on the cusp that have been fighting for LFA. Ricky Farrar, that was originally in Team Indiana, moved over to train with Sam over at Team Quest over in California. He's been fighting both Bellator and LFA. There's just a bunch of guys that we gave opportunities to that are finally getting to live out that dream. And without, the Frankie Signs of the world and Sam Alvey, without those guys jumping on board and getting those guys involved, we probably aren't as far as we are today.
Well, it's always awesome to hear about, fighters, from their true beginnings, moving all the way up into, the big league, so to speak. And with that in mind, I know you've talked about this being essentially the comparisons to the NCAA, right? In terms of getting that amateur fight league. In terms of when fighters do decide to go pro, is the end goal to get them to promotions, say as like Titan FC, LFA, or is your vision one day that this becomes so established and gets enough recognition that if someone goes through the league, wins multiple years with the team, is looking great, could then go pro with a bigger promotion like Bellator or the UFC something like that?
It's going to take a little bit to get there, but it's absolutely what we foresee our league being. And I'll bring some examples into that. Most fighters in the UFC have sturdy amateur records. Then they have 8 to 10 pro fights that are very impressive before the UFC will even consider them. But there have been a few UFC fighters that didn't take that path. And let's say Brock Lesnar in his case. Let's talk about CM Punk getting his shot very early. And the reason those two names got those opportunities were not because they were super talented, which I think Brock Lesnar was and maybe CM Punk wasn't. But they got those opportunities because they had a fan base. They had people willing to follow them, to come watch them in the UFC. UFC did not care whether or not they had a huge amateur record or a great pro record. They just knew that those guys were going to be great ticket sellers. They're going to be great entertainers, and they gave them their opportunities early. So if I do my job at the Elite Amateur Fight League and I find that opportunity for talented fighters, if I give them 3 years in the Elite Amateur Fight League with television exposure, great fan base building, people know who they are, why wouldn't someone take a shot on a guy that has a fan base? And so if I can do my job correctly, we're really helping, companies like the UFC and Bellator find these guys that can make them some good money on the promotional end of the sport. And with that being said, man, let's talk about fighter pay, because everybody's talking about fighter pay.
Right. Yeah. Before we make that transition to fighter pay, 100% with what you're saying in terms of getting fighters signed to the UFC, right? We've seen it on Dana White's Contender Series. You got the occasional, someone who has a background in combat sports maybe makes the transition to MMA, or they've got enough of a fan base that they can just go ahead and go straight in rather than having to do, the paying of dues, so to speak, on the regional scene. So it certainly makes sense. And I do believe there is a pool there that you can grab from, especially if the brand gets elevated where, it's nationally recognized and it's really speaking for the amateur fighters. In terms of fighter pay, when you're talking about the amateur leagues,
Yeah,
I've heard stories where you're paying to fight, right? You're
absolutely.
doing the
Right.
medicals, doing all of that.
Yeah.
What does that look like on your end? Is this an
Sure.
opportunity where if I'm going through an amateur league, like I'm being compensated something?
Well, obviously, to hold amateur status, you can't be paid to fight. I mean, that's just the facts of having the amateur status. But what we do, I think, better than anybody else is treat them like NCAA athletes. We pay for their flights, we pay for their ground travel, we pay for their food when they get here, we pay for their lodging. All they really have to do is worry about showing up to fight. They don't have to worry about all those logistics and what it's going to cost them to get out, to an event. And then we give them the opportunity to prove their talent against a top amateur from across the country. Where if you stay in just your little nook and cranny of the Midwest or the Southwest, you're going to beat those one or two guys that have talent. Then you got eight soup cans to beat up before you can go pro. And we've really put that model on end and said, hey man, if you're that 5-0, 4-0 guy, here's an opportunity to travel on our dime, on the league's dime, be treated like a professional athlete or an NCAA athlete. You got to learn how to travel. You got to learn how to cut weight while you're traveling. You got to learn how to stay in a hotel. You got to learn how to show up to the fight when it's not in your backyard. And these are all the things the NCAA does for other athletes, right? They basically train them on how to be a professional. And that's what we do with the Elite Amateur Fight League. If we can build these guys a fan base, we think where we offer value is what their pro contracts will look like in the future. It's a travesty what these guys are making at the highest level in the most dangerous sport in the world when they step into that cage for the first time. And I get why the pay is the way it is. It's these guys have no fan base. The professional promotion has to build them up to have value, and therefore there's not a whole lot of value. When you step in as a rookie into those scenarios, it's different than the point guard at Duke who gets a $8 million contract before he ever dribbles a ball in the NBA. But the reason is that that point guard at Duke has millions of fans that are willing to follow him to whatever team he's going to. NCAA doesn't. I'm sorry, the MMA industry doesn't have that, and that's what we're really trying to change. We're trying to make it so that these guys can build a fan base as amateurs when they're young, so that they can get paid when they move on to the pros.
You also mentioned on the Face of Business Chicago podcast that you spent a full year of just R&D, which I love that concept. I know a lot of people that would rail against that, be like, no, you got to get going. You got to figure it out as you go along. But I'm a big R&D guy in terms of any type of new business, right? You got to make sure that everything is there before you leap full in. During that time, during that R&D, did you learn any crazy insights, or was there something that really stood out to you that helped you when you did actually launch and go through all of this?
Yeah, during that year of R&D, we started knowing we wanted an MMA media product. We knew we wanted that, right? We didn't know what it was going to look like. We didn't know exactly what it was going to be. And I think that the big thing we learned was that if we were going to be a professional MMA promotion, we were going to be the 12th, 13th, 14th best professional MMA promotion breaking into the game if we did a good job. Meaning, you got A-level talent on the UFC. You got B-level talent in Bellator. You got C-level talent with Professional Fighters League or World Series of Fighting back then. And then you've got a bunch of D-level talent even below there in all these different larger regional promotions. The truth of the matter is, if we're going to be a media product, no one watches D-level talent on television. That's just, no one watches single A baseball on TV. Therefore, no one's going to watch the 5th, 6th, or 7th best professional MMA event on television. But what we found was that, man, there's this glaring hole in a multi-billion-dollar industry that every other sport takes advantage of. The NCAA basketball tournament grosses $1 billion in 5 weeks. That's amateur athletics. $1 billion in 5 weeks. If we can follow that format and use it in the exciting and the growing sport of MMA, why wouldn't we go to be the best national amateur league in the country? No one else was doing it. It didn't exist. Hole in the market, in an industry that needs what you do, that's still a young industry and growing. trying to be a mainstream sport. I believe we found the key to making that transition, and that's why we jumped in the game after that full year of R&D as a national amateur MMA organization.
Makes sense to me. And I also got to ask, knowing your background, because you were a professional poker player for a bit, right? Before all this.
I was a semi-professional.
Semi-professional. Okay.
Yeah.
So, still, I mean, if I remember correctly, you placed what, 7th at the World Series?
The first time the World Series came to Chicago in their circuit events, I placed 7th at the World Series of Poker here in Chicago at the Horseshoe Casino. You know, and I really got into that. I got into this business because I'm a producer, but I got into being a producer from my original business, Aztec Audio Video, where we built and installed high-end electronic systems in homes. We then converted into building man caves. That turned into a television opportunity that we spun into the Man Card Crew television show, which led us to build a relationship with NBC, which then allowed me to concept the Elite Amateur Fight League and you know, pitch it to them. And lucky enough, we got picked up in that first season on NBC Sports Chicago. So yeah, just a bunch of opportunities and taking advantage of those opportunities. And you know, if you don't do that, you really got no one to blame but yourself.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of those things where I always tell people that want to know about business, it's, you know, you start with one thing and you have no idea where you're going to end up, right? You very, very rarely does somebody say, okay, I'm going to start this business, and then it takes off. That's what they're doing for the next 20, 30 years. Usually it's exactly what you're talking about. Starting with Aztec Audio Video, ending up going into poker, then getting an opportunity from that to go into TV, and so on and so forth. And the reason I brought up poker is because one thing I always like asking people as well is about unique skills that might be outside their range of, you know, their profession, so to speak. If I'm a, you know, if I'm a contractor or an electrician, you know, I might have some skill that you would never associate with being an electrician that really helped me out. Does poker playing and having been at that level, does that help you with negotiating? Does it help you in terms of making deals, anything like that? I know that's a thing I've always been curious about. I play a little bit, but I would not win at any event. So
I think what led into, and I think it starts before poker. It was the United States Marine Corps experience I had. It really teaches you how to read people. When first you got to learn how to be a good follower in the Marine Corps. Then they teach you how to be a good leader. And as a leader, you got to be able to read, you know, your Marines, and you've got to convince them to do some things that normal people wouldn't do. And it takes a different mindset with each individual person to really, you know, lead a squad of Marines, right? So some guys are motivated by different things, and you've really got to just, you know, get personal and know your man and know what you need to do to motivate them to do the things that you guys all need to do together. And I think that's what led me into being a good poker player. You just got to sit there and learn those guys and really pay attention to their mannerisms and what they're doing and when they're betting and what they do when they win and what they do when they lose and what they do when they fold and what they do when they stay in a hand they shouldn't. And it's just you got to be super attentive to who you're playing with or who you're leading or who you're in the game with. And with MMA, it's very similar. You've got a ton of different relationships, whether it's the coach, whether it's the fighters, whether it's a broadcast entity, whether it's a business partner or an affiliate promoter. You've got to just, you know, you've got to be able to read what they need, what they want, and then be able to deliver that to keep a good relationship. And I think that's probably with any business.
I'd agree. And thank you so much for your service, of course, and awesome insight there into, you know, an aspect overlooked a lot on the business side of MMA, right? In terms of being attentive, being able to look of all that. That is a general business, you know, savvy you should have, but especially in MMA, I think that applies very well. With that in mind, I mean, I want to thank you so much for being on the show, all the awesome knowledge you dropped. Any events lined up? Any dates? Anything you want to, you know, let us in on here?
Sure. So I think that the newest thing right now, obviously, is we were trying to get an event kicked off before the end of 2020. I really wanted to do something, but the state of Illinois and Indiana are still not giving out permits, and that's kind of where we're based out of. we can go down to Florida and have an event. But we're not going to do that. We're gonna sit on what we have currently until we have an opportunity to run the full tournament, meaning all 12 teams or all 16 teams in one place, and in a NCAA type of weekend, right, where you run the whole thing and record the whole thing and broadcast the whole thing. We're going to wait until we can do that to kick off the next season. We were going to try to rush into an event here or there, but I just don't think it does us any good to rush into things. The other thing is we're probably going to have 2 professional events next year, highlighting some of the guys that have gone pro and are ready to make that jump, right, that have been with the Elite Amateur Fight League in the past, and giving them opportunities to fight as pros with our broadcast partners, and giving them more exposure. So I know we want to do that next year. Then obviously at the end of the year, the WeFunder opportunity closes. So if you got an opportunity to invest and you're interested in MMA or want to be part of a sports league, you got to jump on it before the end of the year, because it's going to go away January 1st. And, we'd like to get our fans or any sports fan the opportunity to invest with us on WeFunder. So make sure to check out WeFunder.com/Elite Amateur Fight League, or just search us in their search bar.
You heard it here, folks. If you've got some money, you want to invest in a league or a sport. I know a lot of you that watch this show have talked to me about investing in MMA. There's your opportunity right there. You've got till the end of the year. Make sure you do it. Again, thank you so much, Jesse. Really appreciate the time.
Awesome, man. Hey, I hope when we do get events up and rolling, you're sitting ringside with us, man. So
yeah, I'll be in the Chicago area. So yes, I will almost certainly be there. I can't wait for it.
Awesome, man. Hey, become an owner.
All right. If you're gonna twist my arm, I don't know. White Sox. I don't know. I got to review it first. White Sox. No.